Hi, everybody. This is Emily Lutrick. We're going to give everybody just about a minute, maybe 2 minutes more, and we will get started very quickly. Okay, everybody. Hi. Thank you all so much for joining today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I see there's several people still joining as we speak, and so we'll get started. But if they join in a couple minutes, I'm sure they'll be able to pick up right where we're leaving off. So I'm so excited to be here with you all. I know we all have very busy schedules, and so for you to take the time to join us today to talk about a critical issue, I'm excited to interact with you and get to know you from afar as best as I can today. So my name is Emily Lutrick, and I currently am the elementary district English language arts coordinator and coordinator of dyslexia K-12 in my hometown school district in Texas, Allen ISD. As a teacher, an administrator, adjunct professor, consultant, advisor for Amplify, I just have had the great privilege for 18 plus years to be able to work alongside so many educators across this nation. I've had the great privilege to see how things are being implemented and things are being done in different places. And I'll tell you that has really grown my understanding of educational systems in such a significant way. So I'm excited to be here today to speak as a consultant for Amplify about dyslexia and some misconceptions that are out there that are impacting instruction and also how these kiddos are able to access learning in classrooms, and then how we can combat them in the classroom. And so again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. In honor of Dyslexia Awareness Month, Amplify is holding a series of webinars to dig deeper into lots of issues that are facing us as a nation and our schools, but in particular about dyslexia and what it means to screen for the risk of dyslexia, what it means to intervene appropriately after risk has been uncovered, and other topics. So we'll talk more about some upcoming webinars that are coming in the future at the very end today. Before we get started, I do want to take just a second and walk through tell you a little bit about Amplify. We're so thankful to Amplify for giving us the opportunity to learn as educators through experiences like this. And so thank you to Amplify for hosting this webinar series and providing this as an access point as educators. So Amplify is an organization that's been in and impacting schools and students and teachers for almost 2 decades, since 2000. The company, if you don't know much about it, the organization provides assessment, instruction, intervention tools, and provides teachers with the supports that we need to understand where our kiddos' strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and then how we can respond to those different various levels of need. The organization supports more than 3 million students across all 50 states. And so if you haven't had a chance, please go explore amplify.com and learn more about this really incredible organization. I've had the great privilege of working alongside them for about a decade, off and on throughout my career. And it is an organization that is unmatched in terms of dedication to this field, dedication to us as practitioners, and also dedication to supporting our world as we move forward to best educate and support readers, writers, thinkers for the future. So take some time, go to amplify.com and learn a little bit more about the organization if you don't already have some schema for that. So I want to just real quickly some housekeeping. This is going to be about a 45-minute, depending on how much I talk, but probably 35 to 45-minute core presentation. And after that, we will have some questions at the end, some time for you to ask questions. I do encourage you on your control panel for the webinar, you're going to have some options for posting questions or posting thoughts to a chat. I do encourage you to use that. There's going to be a couple of times throughout the webinar where I have you stop and reflect on things that are happening in your world. So do take a chance to put questions in there. I'm going to try to answer as many as I can today, but we will follow up on all those questions as well. And then chat, if you have a thought or you have something you want to add to this conversation, I'm going to try as best I can to make this as interactive as possible with all of us being completely remote, but I'll try my best to do that. At the very end, I'm also going to ask you to use another feature of the webinar, which is a little hand. It should be towards the bottom of your control panel, and there's a little hand that when you push the hand, it raises, and when you push it again, it lowers the hand. So it just gives us the opportunity to ask questions, and at different times I'll ask you to raise your hand and then lower it, and that way hopefully I can get some of you to raise your hand. I can unmute you so we can talk to each other, and then I'll mute you back because there's so many on us on here. We don't want to overwhelm everybody with distracting noises. So use those chats, please, and use those those features over there as best we can, and we'll use them to our advantage to try to talk to each other. All right, so let's dig in here a bit. Our agenda for today, in the 35 to 40 minutes that I'm going to spend kind of talking through these topics, we're going to start by diving into an interactive little activity, I guess is what you could call it, to uncover some fact and fiction about dyslexia. And so we'll go through and kind of dig into some misconceptions that are out there, and also talk about some research behind why these have become misconceptions. We're then going to spend the next part of our time together focusing on indicators of risk. What do we need to be looking for when we're worried about a kiddo, or that we're finding some strengths and weaknesses that we need to really dig into? So what are some indicators of risk when it comes to dyslexia? And we'll break that down even by grade level. So not just talk about indicators as a whole, but then what you can look for in specific grade levels. And then we'll wrap up the content portion of the webinar by focusing on classroom actions. So what's the difference between screening and identifying? And what are some practical tips and tools that we can use in classrooms to help support learners, whether they have been identified as having risk of dyslexia or whether they have been identified as having dyslexia. So we'll talk through both types of classroom action pieces. And then we'll end with some questions and conversation. And again, we'll try to make that just as meaningful and powerful as we possibly can in a remote environment. So I'm going to dig right in. We're going to start with fact and fiction. So get your chat panel, question panel ready, because I'm going to post some questions, give you a couple seconds to respond, and then we'll figure out the answers here. So let's start with the first. The first topic here, true or false? Dyslexia is a visual problem. Its hallmark symptom is reversing letters and numbers, as in B versus D. So take just about 10 seconds. You can put something in the chat for me. Is it true? Is it false? What do you guys think? You can put it in the question. Oh. See, it's so cool on my side, you guys, because I can see what everybody's putting. I'm seeing lots of falses. And so you guys, for this one, the answer is false for this particular myth. But as many of you probably know, it is something that a lot of times people do think that this is the case. So this is a false statement. Dyslexia is primarily an issue of phonological processing, really being able to analyze speech and spoken language. Students with dyslexia have difficulty reading because they struggle with a foundational basic language skill, a lot of times phonemic awareness, phonics, but being able to recognize individual sounds and words. So for instance, on the screen, imagine that the wrong sound is associated with a symbol. That can cause some chaos in terms of how a reader interacts with text or how a writer puts their thoughts onto paper. So that is definitely false. Great job, great work there. Let's move on to the next one. True or false? It is possible to identify students with signs of dyslexia even before they learn to read. Take just a second. What do you guys think on that one? Okay, I'm seeing lots of trues. See a couple of falses, but overwhelming majority say, oh, no clue. I know. Story of my life, right? As educators, we're constantly faced with different opportunities to say, I am not sure about that, but I will find out. So true or false? It is possible to identify students with signs of dyslexia even before they learn to read. This is a true statement. So a really great resource here. The website is on the bottom of the screen, blog.dyslexia.com. Dyslexia begins early. You can Google it as well. But some clues for and signs of dyslexia do tend to emerge before kiddos sometimes even start school. According to IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, go to their website, tons of resources. Not only is it possible to identify potential reading problems early, but also it's critical, right? It's critical that we do this and find a way to do this very effectively in our schools and in our systems. There is a university in Finland and then also some research happening at Boston Children's Hospital. Again, if you Google that, you can pull up more information about it. But what's really interesting about this new research is that we're learning how to do, to image the brain, to get an image of the brain. And some of this newer research is starting to point out that when you're looking at an infant's brain that has family history of dyslexia, a genetic predisposition, I guess, of sorts, and comparing that to a brain of a dyslexic person later in life, that you're seeing some similarities in the way that the brain is imaged. And so what that's showing to us, and does actually correlate with the Davis theory, that dyslexic children are picture thinkers and experience things differently when it comes to working with the sounds of our language, learning how to read, learning how to write, become a reader and a writer. This is really incredible research, and I can't wait to follow it and see what happens in the future. But it just goes to show that, yes, this is true. We can identify risk early. We have to look at lots of different factors and variables, but it is definitely something that we can identify early. So the next one in our little game here, if you call it that, true or false, students with dyslexia will never be able to read on grade level. What do you guys think? Never be able to read. Okay, false, 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 lots of false. We have 211 people on this webinar, by the way. That's a lot of people and a lot of falses. So let's check our thinking and see if we are spot on there. That is false. Good answer, you guys. Good answer. This seems pretty basic, but you guys, I mean, it's just, even these basic things are so critical to talk to all stakeholders about. It's critical for us as practitioners in education to have these conversations with everybody, because whether you have, depending on the foundation that people are coming to our profession, they might not know these things, but this is absolutely false. Students with dyslexia, they do sometimes have difficulty with fluency and other reading skills, phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, but with early intervention that's systematic and explicit, accommodations, a flexible curriculum, these kiddos absolutely can succeed at reading across academic subjects. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So true or false, next one. Students with dyslexia just need more time to learn to read. Just need more time to learn to read. True or false? True, false, true, false, true, false. I've got lots of trues. I've got lots of falses. So yeah, we're like split 50-50, you guys. True, false, lots of trues, lots of falses. So this is one. We put this one as false, okay? And the reason we put this one as false is, yes, sometimes a lot of kids, depending on whatever, some kids take longer to learn to read than others. But for students that are presenting with indicators of dyslexia or dyslexia, they need time spent in high quality research based instruction. And there is some study, is some research out there that's really pointing to, and we know this from just realistically being in classrooms where dyslexia therapy is occurring, in as little as sometimes 6 to 8 weeks, you can start to see a strengthening of a child's skill when it comes to reading. And so while it could take a long time, it doesn't have to take a long time. And so that's why we call that one false. But again, this is more about an opportunity to have conversation with your colleagues. Do this true or false in a professional development or an after school meeting. I encourage you, we'll give you access to these slides so you can do that, because it just opens up really great conversation about what do we mean? Is it always going to take them longer to learn to read? Not necessarily. We need to get in, intervene, provide the right kind of structured literacy instruction, and move on, get them reading and writing. All right, next up. True or false? Since people with dyslexia read more slowly, they also think more slowly. What do you guys think? False? So not true. Or better teaching like that. No, no, no. Oh, you guys are getting creative with your answers now. We have some truths. We have some passion behind some of these true, false answers now. But this one in general, you guys, ridiculous. Okay, I like it. I like it. I like the passion. Everybody's saying false for this one. Absolutely false. So again, since people with dyslexia read more slowly, they also think more slowly. This one is absolutely false, you guys. Dyslexia has nothing to do with a kiddo's ability to think fast or creatively. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Dyslexia is one of the can present difficulty with reading in students who are struggling, who are solidly average, ridiculously gifted, anywhere in between. It's not that is one reason, or not one reason, but that's one of the many variables that we have to consider when thinking about dyslexia in our schools. So love the passion behind that one. True or false? Children with dyslexia can succeed using the same texts, master the same standards, and utilize the same curricula as their classmates. All right. True with accommodations. Good. True. Yep. Okay. Seeing lots of trues there. So yes, this one we do mark as true as well, because with proper differentiated with supports, with proper therapy interventions, those kiddos with signs of or with dyslexia can succeed. They can be, this community of learners in your classroom can become a community of readers and writers and have access to the same standards, have access to the same materials. Lots of nuances to that, but yes, it absolutely is true. Very good. All righty, so let's transition now. We've kind of demystified, I think is the right word, some myths about dyslexia. And again, I encourage you to take this type of activity back to your schools or whatever situation you're in. It's always a very telling experience for people, and it's just a great way to have conversation about this particular topic. So I want to now dive in a bit and look at the International Dyslexia Association's most current definition of dyslexia. So you see that on the screen. I'm going to give you just about 15 seconds to read through it. There's a lot of information there. Okay. Anytime I'm working with different groups of educators and stakeholders around the nation and in my current district, I like to go back to the definition because it's jam-packed and it's filled with viable, good information that we need to understand. I also like to unpack it a bit. So this particular definition is just jam-packed. So we go back and then we take each line and unpack it a bit. And as you can imagine, in a face-to-face type of experience, you can have great conversation about what are the key parts of each of these pieces of the dyslexia definition. But in this first sentence, dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. The kind of key unpacking there is around neurobiological, and we then can go and talk more about that in just a moment. And the second one, some of the key words there that we highlighted is difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition. Characterized, a lot of people will end up highlighting characterized by poor spelling and decoding abilities. They're looking for things to hang on to. In this next point, difficulties typically result from a deficit in phonological component of language, and that's a big piece of this part of the definition. The other thing that we did not highlight, but I will tell you, in a lot of educator groups gets highlighted and should get highlighted, is the unexpected words. So we'll kind of dive into that too. And if you go to IDA and other resources, you'll get some more information about what it means to be unexpected, for challenges to be unexpected in the classroom. But that is a big piece of what the definition of dyslexia entails. And then secondary consequences for this line, we highlighted problems in reading comprehension can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Those are some key characteristics and key secondary consequences. Again, here's the definition. When you get access to these slides, you'll be able to go there. And again, if you just type in IDA, you'll be able to find, or definition of dyslexia, you'll be able to find access to this as well. Again, great conversation can happen around just unpacking this definition as well. And we're going to dive into this definition today too. To back that up and to kind of take that definition and then translate it into what this is and what it is not, we have one more visual that we want to show you. And this is a visual that is from the understood.org website. But it does take the definition and then just kind of make it real tangible for us. So dyslexia is a brain-based issue, a lifelong condition, a common learning issue, meaning many successful people have it, and researchers have been studying it for a long, long time. Dyslexia is not a problem of intelligence, is not a problem of vision, is not a problem of laziness. So again, if you're thinking about all of those true, false questions that we went through, and then looking at the definition and trying to really break it down into what it is and what it is not, I hope that this visual helps with that. And then kids with dyslexia may have trouble with, and then here are some things that we're going to talk through here. So kids with dyslexia may have trouble with reading smoothly, with recognizing sight words, with rhyming, understanding their comprehension of what they read, decoding written words, learning a foreign language, spelling, writing. They may have difficulty with some of these. They may have no difficulty with others. It really is student by student. But in general, you will see some consensus out there in the research about these are sort of the key things that kiddos tend to struggle with when they have dyslexia. So the other thing for me is I am not dyslexic. My husband is. And as a practitioner, researcher, educator, I'm always trying to really understand, what is it like? Because I want to make sure that then I can support the learner in the best way possible. And so we have 3 images here that I'm gonna pull up on the screen. And these 3 images are sometimes if you talk qualitatively, if you talk to a learner that is struggling with indicators of dyslexia, risk of dyslexia, or with dyslexia, these are some things that they tell us about what they see when they are interacting with a text. Not every student that has dyslexia will have these specific type of issues. These 3 examples are not comprehensive. Some readers won't interact with the text in this way, in these 3 ways, but others will. So let's look through these real quick together. The first one up here just take a second and kind of read through it. And so this one is really focusing on a reader that when they interact with text, text, the words are not spaced correctly for some reason. Words are either pushed together or they're separated too far, or the spacing, you see letters and words that are kind of split up differently. You see this a lot of times, at least I have, in the classroom. When you're looking at writing samples, you start to see some differences in the way that the words are spaced. And so again, qualitatively, if you talk to students that have dyslexia or are showing signs of dyslexia, sometimes they say things that make you think, okay, maybe they're seeing the spacing is something going on here. So that's one example of what it could be like to read with dyslexia. The second one, take a second to read that one. So in this one, this example, some people say that some people who have dyslexia say that the words on the page look shadowed or doubled when they read. And it's not because it's a visual problem. It's just that's the way that the spacing in the letters, the way that that is being processed, that's what it looks like to them. And so we'll dig into that a bit more too. And then read the last one. So in this one, some people, again, qualitatively, if you talk to a person that has dyslexia, they say that the words look blurred, and sometimes it's blurred in different places. Like again, something's coming in and coming out into the brain in a little bit of a different way, and it's causing some blurriness. So this is why one of those myths that we unbunked about it being a visual problem, that this is one of those reasons that if you don't really dive in and understand what is behind dyslexia, that you could easily say this is an issue, it's a visual issue, right? Because these are the types of things that someone that has dyslexia might be able to tell us about what they're seeing on the page. Again, some of these issues, other people might not have any of these types of issues and have dyslexia. But I like to, this helps me at least frame, and it also helps me ask questions of kiddos when I'm trying to really understand what they're struggling with. All right, so think about that, and then think for just a couple minutes about what it was like for you to learn to read. How does this compare to the experience you had learning to read, or how would you feel if this was your experience with texts and reading every day? How would it impact you day to day? Take just a couple seconds to let that resonate a bit. I would feel overwhelmed. I would avoid it. I would feel lost. This is what I'm seeing. It must be incredibly frustrating and lonely and overwhelming. Thank you, Lana, I think. I'm sorry if I mispronounced the names. Arlene, I would avoid it. Kristen is saying it would be so frustrating. Karen's saying I would absolutely want to give up. Maud is saying I would be exhausted. Deborah is saying I would give up. Vicky is saying I would never read for pleasure. Absolutely. A couple other people here, I would dislike it. It would seem impossible. I would be so discouraged. It would make me so sad. And as someone who is dyslexic, I hated Dr. Seuss, and even to this day I hate it. Y'all, that is, yeah, I put that there. Maybe intentionally, maybe not, but yeah, I thank you so much for adding your thoughts there. I really appreciate you guys doing that. It helps me understand, and that's exactly, again, this is exactly the type of conversation you need to have. We need to be able to get into the shoes of our learners, and I know we do that in so many ways, but for our dyslexic students, it feels, we rely sometimes heavily on people that are providing intervention or therapy, and I think every day in classrooms that we need to be responsible as well for understanding what they are going through and what we can do to help them access text, right? To help them love it, to not want to cry, to not be exhausted. It is an exhausting thing. And that is why we have to screen early, identify risk, intervene appropriately, move forward with evaluation if necessary, and provide structured literacy instruction to those students to help them be successful, because they can be. Absolutely. And we can take all that fear and frustration and being upset and exhaustion away. and help support them to become a reader and a writer that's completely capable of attacking this media heavy world that we live in. So let's transition and talk about that specifically. When we have a kiddo that starts to struggle, what are the indicators of risk that we need to be looking for as teachers? What do we need to be focusing on? So according to, I take quite a bit of my information from well, there's lots of sources out there, and I'll point those out in just a moment. But this particular next few slides was adapted from the International Dyslexia Association, has really robust indicators of risk and lists that you can go to, and also specifically the Texas Dyslexia Handbook that is under draft, but being fully adopted in November. Right now, there is a draft out there that has robust lists and indicators of risk that we can study as well. So those are two, I think, easy to comprehend resources out there that I encourage you to go and look at. But holistically, what you see on the screen are some possible indicators of risk that you would want to be looking for in your students that are starting to struggle or starting to have areas of concern. So one is difficulty learning to speak at an early age, difficulty learning letters and their sounds, difficulty organizing written and spoken language. So that can be unpacked quite a bit. And then also difficulty reading quickly enough to comprehend. So is there a fluency issue? Are we reading and somewhat accurate, but is it fluent enough that comprehension is going hand in hand? So those are kind of four big things that I tend to look through as a lens, but then to break that down even further by grade level. In the elementary age grade levels and even pre-K, here's some specific things that you would want to be looking for in terms of a common risk factor for dyslexia. Again, adapted from IDA and the Texas Dyslexia Handbook. One is difficulty with rhyming, difficulty pronouncing words, trouble learning letters and numbers, difficulty segmenting words when they're decoding and attacking words that they don't know. Difficulty manipulating those sounds in the words, and difficulty spelling phonetically in particular. And if any of those are troublesome and you don't know what they are, Google it and you'll get some information for the most part that can tell you, okay, what does it mean to have difficulty segmenting words? You can Google that and you can kind of dive in and see some examples of what that means. For later elementary kiddos, this is where sometimes we don't pay enough attention, but in the older grade levels, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade even, we have 6th grade in elementary schools in my district. These risk factors are going to be difficulty recognizing those sight words, difficulty decoding single words, difficulty reading fluently, avoidance of reading, just like all we said, this stuff is bottled up and now I don't want to read because it is too hard and I'm completely frustrated. And use of less complicated words in writing. So you'll really see a lot start to happen in writing in the later elementary grades. It's very basic. A lot of times the writing, again, using less complicated words. And then a reliance on listening rather than reading for comprehension. Listening comprehension is lots of times very much a strength. And then even further, to take that even further, in the secondary world or post-secondary world, what can we look like for someone that is having trouble, that is struggling? Does a kiddo take lots of time to complete tasks in reading and writing? Do they avoid reading altogether? And are they having issue learning a foreign language? Because that does typically impact them differently in the secondary world. And so those are some common risk factors. So what do we do about that? What do we do about, now that we know some common risk factors, and I didn't show you any of those screens, so I apologize for that, but I certainly will give you guys access to these slides whenever we send you guys the recording. So I'll go very slowly through these. Here's the elementary list. Here's the later elementary list. And here's the secondary list. So sorry about that. So now that we kind of have an understanding of some risk factors, what do we do to screen for risk? This is a topic being talked about across the nation very, very heavily. To give you some context, in general, we have federal legislation that requires many of us to screen kiddos for risk of reading difficulty in the lower elementary grade levels, K2, some districts K3, it just depends. But most recently, and in the past 5 years, since 2013, starting back in 2013, only 2 states had actual legislation that related to screening for risk of reading difficulty, but also screening for risk of dyslexia. And in the past 5 years, that number has tripled. We have now close to, I think, 21 states that have dyslexia-based screening legislation. And I'll show you what those states are in just a second. But before I do that, these are the critical skills that have been identified as needed for the screening of risk of dyslexia. Phonological awareness, alphabetic principle, phonics, reading fluency, reading accuracy, reading comprehension, and many states are adding rapid naming, spelling, and vocabulary to that list as well. So if you are unsure if your state has dyslexia-based screening legislation, here is a list of the 20 currently, and this is changing often, the 21 states that have passed dyslexia screening laws recently. And more and more are happening all the time. But this movement of having screening legislation, we really have to thank and honor the work that's being done by Decoding Dyslexia as an organization to support this movement, IDA to support this movement, and lots of other organizations, don't get me wrong, and educators, practitioners, parents, advocacy groups that are out really rallying for the need to have very specific legislation that helps support us as we are identifying and screening for risk of dyslexia earlier and earlier in our schools. So these are the current 21 states that do at this time have some form of legislation. If you were not able to join the webinar last week about this legislation and what is happening, I need to find out, but there was a webinar last week, and I'm thinking we're going to rerun that or give you access to a recorded copy of that if you registered for it last week. So there's some good information that Amplify is working with organizations on and getting information out there about this screening. If you have specific questions about your state, please email us. I'll give you that email at the end, and we'll be happy to help you find where to go to learn more about the legislation that's happening in your particular state. Okay, so I want to talk quickly then. We have these states that say you need to screen for risk of dyslexia, risk of reading difficulty, but also risk of dyslexia in your students in the early grade levels. And so how do we do that? We know that we have this list of many things that we need to be screening for, but then how do we do that in schools? So I do want to talk to you very quickly about mCLASS, mCLASS assessments, and this mCLASS will hit all of these areas in terms of how we screen for risk for phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, all the way down to vocabulary, spelling, and RAN. So if you don't know much about mCLASS, please go to amplify.com and go to the assessments button, and you will be able to go in and find out more about dyslexia screening tools, but also in general screening tools that you can use to screen for risk of reading across all of your students. And we are happy to dive into this. If for anyone interested, we're not going to take the time today to dive in to every assessment measure and what it looks like. That's not the point of this webinar, but if you are interested in seeing what this would look like and what it means to screen via an assessment for risk of dyslexia, please email us and we're happy to talk to you about that. I'm a huge advocate of this assessment and what it's going to be able to do for us as educators to identify risk in our students, but and also as importantly, risk of dyslexia. So please take a moment to, after this, to go and look at that. Okay, so we've identified kind of what dyslexia is and what it is not. We've identified some common risk factors, some indicators of risk, and also the need to screen early to identify. We need to be screening kiddos and identifying risk earlier rather than later. We need to intervene appropriately. So then what do we do once this happens? So let's talk real quick here about the difference between screening for risk of dyslexia and actually identifying through an evaluation dyslexia. This is where a lot of people the lines get a little bit blurry. We want to screen all students to determine, do they have risk of reading difficulty and do they have risk of dyslexia, okay? That then tells us who we need to intervene with, what kind of intervention a lot of times as well, depending on how diagnostic the data is. It tells us what we need to do to intervene. That is different from then determining that a child has dyslexia through an evaluation. And so we're going to talk about both. And I always try to make that real clear with anybody that I have the privilege and joy to talk to. We have a need for screening and intervention and a need for evaluation and identification. So let's talk first about, you screened. Let's say you were able to screen and you determine that you have a group of students in your classroom or in your school that you feel is at risk for dyslexia. Now we need to intervene. And so I wanted to share with you today this from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Again, a wonderful resource. Go to their website, dig in, very practical, informative information that you can use in classrooms today about intervention. But the National Center on Intensive Intervention out of the American Institutes for Research gives us sort of some principles for intervention, which you see on your screen. And these principles are really what we need to be thinking about whenever we are providing intervention for students. And in this case, intervention for students that are demonstrating risk of reading or risk of dyslexia. So according to them, the instructional principles that we need to focus on is that intervention needs to be explicit. We need to have explicit instruction focused on the 5 big ideas found by the National Reading Panel in 2000, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And we need that explicit instruction to be linked to those 5 main areas following an I do, you do, I do, we do, you do approach to instruction, making it as explicit as possible. The next thing is systematic instruction. So we want to make sure that when we're providing an intervention, that our instruction is planned in such a way that those skills presented in each lesson are building upon what was previously taught in a logical sequence. So instruction, we start with simple skills and move to more complex ones during intervention. But the key here is that in your explicit instruction, that it's systematic, that we're making that intervention pointed and clear and concise and tied nicely together, right? And then the next principle for intervention out of the National Center on Intensive Intervention is making sure that the instruction is precise, simple, and using replicable language. What this means is that students in intensive intervention sometimes have difficulty processing language that we're using when we're providing instruction. We ask a lot of questions, which is fantastic. We do a lot of model thinking and shared thinking, and that's fantastic too. But we want to use simple, precise language that we're making sure students have access to understanding that. So making sure that the instructions are short and clearly stated, doing a lot of thinking aloud, but not thinking aloud forever, thinking aloud and making it precise and simple, right? Not negotiating the level of the learning and how rigorous the learning is, but being clear about what we're doing, which I think is just a good methodology anyway. And then the next one is repeated opportunities to practice. So again, spiraling the learning and intervention is really, really critical. Making sure that kiddos have the chance to practice with teacher support, have a chance to practice in a guided support type of situation, and have a chance to practice individually until they get to a level of mastery. And the next one is build fluency and review. That kind of ties into the last one, followed by frequent opportunities to respond. So in intervention, always consider ways that we can increase the way that the student is responding to us, not us doing all of the work. Where we want to make those kiddos work hard in that intervention, give them opportunity to ask the questions and to dig in instead of us always doing that. And then also in intervention, specific error correction and feedback. So provide both positive feedback and error correction. It's essential. When students are making errors, that's critical learning that can happen from that error. And so it's important that they receive that immediate feedback. And in an intervention model, we should have that built into the time in which we're working with students. So in terms of intervention, Amplify does have a few things that I encourage you to go and use as resources. Amplify has a couple of primers, learning to read, that really can build some understanding of what it means for some students that are struggling, what it means for them to learn to read. These are really powerful pieces of professional learning that you can look at. We also have a burst reading intervention program that can be used in classrooms that will help us figure out who is in a group and then what skills kiddos need to be working on, and provide you with that systematic, explicit intervention and instruction plan for those kiddos. So take a look at that. And then we also have other curricular supports like CKLA, which is a skills-based curriculum that could also be another thing to look at if you are wanting to find other intervention supplements or resources to use in your schools and in your district. All right. So once a student is identified, IDA supports the use of structured literacy. Structured literacy is a term that IDA uses to really just describe evidence-based programs and approaches. I know there's some people on the webinar from IDA, so I hope that I speak knowledgeably about this. But IDA has really done a great job in helping us as district and school-based people to understand what are we looking for whenever we need a program to help support our students that have been identified with dyslexia. And so they encourage you to look at a structured literacy program, which has a component of phonology. Phonology is the study of sound, the sound structure of spoken words. So phonological awareness includes rhyming, counting words and sentences, clapping syllables in spoken words, and also includes phonemic awareness, which is the ability to segment words into individual sounds or phonemes. So you're looking at something that has a strong phonology portion of the literacy program. Additionally, you're looking for a program that focuses on sound simple association. This is also can be termed phonics. But once we have a student that has developed awareness of phonemes of spoken language, the sound of our spoken language, they need to learn how to map those phonemes to symbols or the printed letters they're seeing in writing. So that sound symbol association must be taught and mastered in two ways: visual to auditory, which is reading, and auditory to visual, which is spelling. And so you're looking for a program that really supports phonics, explicit, systematic, research-based instruction. You're going to want something that focuses on syllable instruction, what it means to uncover the 6 basic syllable types and learn them: closed syllables, vowel consonant E syllables, open syllables, consonant LE syllables, are controlled, and vowel pairs. Those all need to be taught. Syllable instruction has to take place. And then morphology. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in language, and so you want to have a program that studies base words, roots, prefixes, suffixes. Syntax, having a program that, a structured literacy program that focuses on syntax, which is a set of principles around the sequence and function of words in a sentence. So that's going to include grammar and the mechanics of our language. So that has to be there as well. And then the last thing is semantics. With semantics, it's that aspect of language concerned with meaning. So the curriculum from the beginning has to include instruction on the comprehension of written language. So again, go to IDA.org. My goodness, y'all, they have infographics that you can use. There's research and tools, a wealth of information there that can be shared with your districts and with you guys in classrooms. And so to wrap up here, I want to talk briefly about what we can do in the classroom. So in the classroom, if you have a child that has been identified with dyslexia, or even those that are at risk, and really honestly, any child will benefit from some of these ideas, but in particular, those learners. We need to make sure we're providing students with some access to some different types of accommodations. One is providing kiddos with a graphic organizer. Give them the opportunity to understand the task at hand, or demonstrate mastery of the task at hand, or understand the content in a different way. So graphic organizers are great for that. Use step-by-step instructions. So many times we give multi-step directions that are completely overwhelming. So if you have a child that has dyslexia, you really need to give them step-by-step instructions. Display work samples for them. Let them see a model of where they need to be heading. Use their own information to produce it, but give them a model. Use flexible work times. Don't put time constraints if you can avoid it. Make sure that they have the ability, that time is not a factor, because that will put us under tons of pressure. Use mnemonic instruction. Help people. This will help students improve the memory of their information. It will help them link prior knowledge through the use of a visual or acoustic cues, different things like that. You can again Google mnemonic instruction and get some ideas there. And then use cues. If you're doing anything written, use cues to denote important items, to denote important strategies. This next thing is one of my big things is, in the classroom, we need to make sure we are giving kiddos options of how to demonstrate understanding of what they are learning, So if you have a student that is struggling, these are questions that I would ask when I'm planning instruction, when I'm planning intervention. Does the demonstration of the content that the child's trying to acquire have to be written? So many times we want students to only show us that they have mastery of content across the subject areas in written format. Well, with students that have risk of dyslexia or dyslexia, that can be extremely overwhelming. And so, do they have to demonstrate with a written product, or is there another way that we can do that? The second question I ask: can a student demonstrate understanding with an oral response? And that goes hand in hand with the third question, which is, what is the verb of the standard? Always go to the verb of the standard. What is the action the student is supposed to be able to demonstrate when they have acquired or mastered that standard? And then how can they demonstrate that action in various ways? So if, for instance, the verb is identify the main character of a story. Well, identify, that does not mean they have to answer a multiple answer question. That does not mean they have to write 3 sentences about who the main character is. Can they tell you that orally? Can they demonstrate by drawing a picture if that is their strength? So really find ways that you're able to have this group of students demonstrate understanding of their learning in a way that's accessible to them. These are 3 main questions that I ask a lot, and it helps us really think differently about demonstration of understanding in the classroom. Okay, you guys, so I want to plug this last resource, and then I'm going to get to some questions here for the last about 8 minutes that we have. Go to the IDA website again. They have a handbook that it's a dyslexia in the classroom, what every teacher needs to know. There's 2 full pages of really incredible accommodations and things that can be used in the classroom, different ideas, tips and tricks. So I do encourage you. You'll also get in this handbook, I'm calling it a handbook, but it's more a resource. You'll get information about signs and symptoms of dyslexia, classroom strategies, components of effective reading instruction. It's a jam-packed document, so I do encourage you to go there. I also, when we give you the recording of this webinar, here's some of our favorite books and websites that we go to. Overcoming Dyslexia, also the Dyslexia yale.edu website is fantastic. Of course, I've said IDA several times. Decoding Dyslexia has a ton of great information. The Dyslexia Checklist by Sandra Reef is a great one. The Dyslexic Advantage, there's some good books there. And then Thank You, Mr. Walker, one of my very, very favorites. So I had to list that one. But these resources are really powerful. Okay. That was a lot of direct information at you. I hope that you have, walking away after this first 54 minutes, you have a better understanding of fact and fiction around dyslexia, a growing base of understanding around indicators of risk and what we can do to screen for risk in our students. And then also the difference between screening and evaluation, and what can be done in the classroom to support your students, whether they have either been identified with dyslexia or identified as at risk for dyslexia. So I'm going to take a few minutes, and we're going to do this two different ways. I'm going to try to answer questions, put questions into the, put some questions into the question board, and I'm going to answer those. And then I'm going to also ask you, if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to try to unmute some of you so that we can have a quick conversation. Let me just go through here. One question was, how do I find out what my state has for screening? I'm at a small private school. Send us an email, and we will be happy to send you some information about whether your state has screening legislation, or where you can go to find out more information. Thank you guys too. Thank you, Melissa, for joining. I see the 4 different assessments was another question, which is one that we were talking about in regards of determining the risk of students. That is an mCLASS question. If you have any specific mCLASS questions, please email us. We'll give you that email in just a second, and we'll get you more information. One other question was, is there a charge to use the mCLASS assessments? Yes, there is. There is a charge for that, and we can send you that pricing information. One other question, would the blurry image, the doubled or the shadowed text image be on all types of visuals or just texts? I am coming from, in my very little amount of direct research that I do on the subject, when you talk to readers, it's typically just text that we see this. Sometimes it can transfer to other subjects though, which are more visual based, but a lot of times it is the letters on the page, if that makes sense. That's a great question. Let me see if there's any other questions here. Let me try to raise, okay, some people have their hands raised. Okay, I'm gonna go, let's see here. Okay, Alicia. I'm going to try to unmute you real quick. Hi, Alicia, are you there? It's not working. Let me try one more. Diane Wooten, let me see if I can unmute you. Hi, Diane, can you hear me? Oh, darn. Well, guys, we tried. We tried. We will have to interact. We'll have to interact via email, if that's okay with you guys. We tried. I tried to unmute a couple of people, but it doesn't seem to be working. So, oh, are you there, Diane? No. Okay. I will continue. We have access to all of your questions, and I will continue to uncover what these questions are and send you guys responses via email. But I'm gonna go through 2 or 3 more here. So let me find another one here. So this is a question from it looks like Mrs. Jacobs. It says, I took a class that said dyslexia can happen in reading, writing, and or math. So this is a topic that's coming up quite a bit across the nation, how dyslexia presents in other subject areas, for instance, math, whether it's dyscalculia or whether it's dyslexia based. And so there's a lot being done and a lot being said about that. And I encourage you to go and read and become informed on that particular topic. But dyslexia can impact in every subject area. Reading and writing, obviously, specifically. And then in math, sometimes, you know, from what I hear from my teachers and therapists is sometimes the problem that kiddos are having in math is like for instance, when you're adding or multiplying, sometimes the symbol causes some problems. And so that, again, it's just a symbol to meaning connection, kind of like they have whenever they're trying to figure out the different letters have certain sounds that are associated with them. But definitely in math and other subjects, because there is so much reading that goes in and writing that goes into those subjects. Dyslexia can definitely impact achievement across those subject areas. Okay. Yes, Alicia, I tried to unmute you. Alicia Frank, I don't know if it worked or not. I thought I saw your name emailed. So I'm going to read one last question here. Would it be possible to receive the PowerPoint and PDF, please? We're going to work on that because I think that that would be helpful. And then one last question. The presenter, Emily, referred to verbs in the standard. The verbs are linguistically speaking referred to as language functions. And so she's saying this phrase is very important when doing standards aligned instruction. Exactly. It's not jargony. She's saying, sorry, it's jargony. Our point about that, as I'm reading and dissecting it, we have to understand what type of actions need to be taken by students to master the standards that we're presenting them with. And so again, going back to the pillars of effective intervention and structured literacy, we have to be clear and explicit that this is what we're expecting you to demonstrate, and this is how we're going to ask you to demonstrate, or these are your options for demonstrating that. So yeah, I'm right on board with you, Lynn, there. Thank you. Okay. We're going to keep coming back to these questions, and we'll go through, and thank you for all the comments that I'm seeing, but also thank you for those questions. We will make sure to answer as many of those as we can. It is 2:01, so I'm going to honor your time and stop on time. I appreciate so much your time today. Please do know we have some upcoming webinars coming up in the next, this Thursday, from the Cortex to the Classroom by Dr. Carolyn Strom out of the New York University. It's on this Thursday. Please register for that. It's going to be powerful information. And if you have, if you want to learn more about anything that we talked about today, please email us at mclass@amplify.com. I get those emails as well. And so, you know, if there's something directed directly to me, Emily Lutrick, you can put that at mclass@amplify.com. For legislation questions, you'll want to go to Julia Gonzalez, and you see her email address on the screen right now. We also have a blog, blog.amplify.com, where there's even more information about dyslexia and dyslexia legislation. So we encourage you to go there as well. I'm only 2 minutes late, which is a record for me. So again, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please reach out with any questions or continued conversation. Thank you.